Hey, gentlemen. The second chapter in the purity section is called Grace Not Grief, Conviction Not Condemnation. Here's just a few key points in this chapter you might want to take a look at, be sure you deal with. The first is, and it's a major part of this chapter, of course, is Matthew 5, where I kind of give you the fictional situation of a guy during that day walking up and listening to Jesus talk about defining adultery or redefining adultery and what that would mean, and the paradigm shift that it created then and the paradigm shift it still creates for us today. That also ties into the concept of Proverbs 23:7, where the enemy wants to tell us, like, hey, there's no harm in eating your fill. The third point would be the enemy's training program for sexual lust in our lives, particularly in the area of porn. Number 4 would be the concept of this whole idea of impure purity. When somebody like me comes along and says to your group, like, I'm going to teach on purity, we actually hear, okay, we're going to talk about impurity, this reality of today of dealing with sexual issues in a straightforward manner. Number 5, when we apply this concept of Matthew 5 and Jesus talking about adultery, he's basically telling us this sexual war really isn't going to be fought below the belt. I'm just making sure you don't do something. The idea is it actually happens in the mind and stopping it where we think. So we are going to lose when our mind is turned from a battleground into a playground. Number 6 is this idea that the Jesus principle behind the law, where we talk about murder and we also talk about adultery, just that his concept is to respect and value life and relationships. So how do we put ourselves on the offense constantly instead of the defense all the time in these areas? And number 7, just as you meet together in your small group, the concept of not just talking about your behavior, but also talking about your thoughts. So share what's going on in your mind, not just going on in your actions. So if you cover those things, that'll be a good overview of the book. Here are your discussion questions for Chapter 2. Number 1, talk about the difference in grace and grief, and then talk about the difference in conviction and condemnation. Question number 2, discuss the fictional story I gave you of the man who heard Jesus teach, and why do you suppose Jesus' teaching on adultery would have been such a paradigm shift, and what creates it to be such a paradigm shift today? Question number 3, talk about why Jesus would teach us that the sin of adultery actually happens in the mind, whether it occurs in the physical or not. Question number 4, why do you think the enemy works so hard to lead us into sin in our sexual lives as early as possible and as often as possible? Question number 5, why is victory in our actions often the final step in freedom from sin? And why are our thoughts so important in that process? Question number 6, discuss the concept of purity today having more of a connotation of impurity, and why is that? Question number 7, why do you think so many single guys think marriage will be the answer and bring the end to any lust issues? And when you were single before, if you're married now, if you were single before you were married, like, how did you think about that? And what was your feelings on that? And how can you maybe help other guys today? Question number 8, discuss these statements that are found on page 32 of the book. True purity is the absence of the motive or the thought that would motivate the wrong action. And this is the ultimate goal for us in every aspect of our lives, not just sexually. Remember the motive, which then kills the thought, which then prevents the action. Take a look at that quote and discuss that. Question number 9, how will it help you to talk openly and honestly about your desires, your attitudes, and your thoughts, and not just about your actions? Question number 10, the last question. In your group, how can you practically move from focusing so much on not doing the don'ts to focus on doing the do's? talk through a strategy for helping each other move from impurity to purity, and be specific.